turn into its final approach.
Between the hisses and the crackles, the story of that fateful day is captured on primitive dictabelt recordings from the Dallas Police Department.
Crossing downtown Dallas now.
Crowds a dozen rows deep were eager to see the young, stylish first couple.
Crowd on Main Street's in real good shape. They got them back off on the curb.
At about 12:30 p.m., as the president's limousine turned onto Elm Street, the police chatter turned from routine to urgent.
Looks like the president's been hit. Help, stand by. 10-4 Parkland has been notified.
Sirens can be heard as the motorcade races the 4 miles to Parkland Hospital.
The president's head was practically blown off.
It was the first real assessment of just how seriously the president had been hurt. Back at Dealey Plaza, the search for whoever killed the president and wounded Texas Governor John Connelly focused on a 7-story brick building.
Get some men up here to cover this building. This Texas school broke apart at the door. They believe that their shots come from that. Attention all squads. The suspect from Elman, Houston is reported to be an unknown white male about 30. Slender build, 5 feet 10 inches tall, 165 pounds, armed with what is thought to be a 30-30 rifle. No further description at this time or information.
The suspect turned out to be Lee Harvey Oswald. He had taken a bus and a cab to his rooming house, picked up a jacket and pistol, then headed out again.
If we have information that a suspect just went in the Texas theater on West Jefferson.
10-4.
Supposed to be hiding in the balcony.
The police found him sitting in the rear of the theater.
The suspect has been apprehended at Texas Theater en route to station.
Aboard Air Force One, still on the ground in Dallas, another drama was unfolding.
We have information now. Judge Sarah Hughes is leaving Parkland en route to Love Field to swear President Johnson in.
With Jackie Kennedy at his side, Lyndon Baines Johnson took the oath as the 36th President of the United States. And Air Force One, now carrying 2 presidents, took off for Washington, D.C.
We don't need anything else out here. We don't need an ambulance or anything. We're just about to clean it up now.
I welcome this kind of examination.
You are free to do as we tell you. You are free to do as we tell you.
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Back and to the left. Back and to the left.
That's why I don't read the newspaper. I'm a man. I'm 40.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency.
As of now, I am in control here in the White House.
This is crack cocaine from the White House. It could easily have been heroin or PCP. It's as innocent looking as candy.
Good evening, this is Mae Brussel in Carmel, California.
Anybody who's not willing to change based on what they learned is ignorant.
Coffee's for closers only.
I think we've given you enough.
On to Chicago and let's win there.
Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
This is the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hi, this is Jeff Lister from the Center for Deep Political Research. You're listening to the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm S.T. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing and traversing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, the court historians, and the textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight we have episode 115, Treachery in Dallas with Walt Brown. Our guest tonight is researcher and author Walt Brown, who'll join us next in the midnight hour. But first, right out of the gates, let us clean this castle. Now, Garrison, the Journal of History and Deep Politics, debuts in exactly 2 weeks and 3 days. That's the first day of the JFK Historical Group's conference in Olney, Illinois. Now, the conference begins on Thursday night, April 4th, with the showing of Randy Benson's wonderful documentary, The Searchers. So you definitely want to be there for that. Now, this is 2019 for those who are listening to the show years down the line. That's when this is all happening. So now there will be approximately 75 to 80 print copies of the magazine available, so you'll absolutely want to take advantage of those if you're a fan of print. Personally, I prefer print. I like how it feels and I like how it looks. I like the visceral connection with it. But, of course, that's me. For those who prefer an e-version of some kind, that will be available too, but only after we've almost sold out of the original print run of the print version of issue 1. So then the obvious question is, will there be another print run of issue 1? And the answer is, I don't know. While I believe that there's a definite need to do a print version, it's also very expensive. And in very expensive, I want to emphasize the word very. So for there to be another print run of issue 1, we would have to sell out of the first run, and then we'd have to do well on the e-versions, as all of the profits go directly towards doing issue 2 first and foremost, and then to reprinting past issues. So that's where it all goes. And we'll also be announcing soon a crowdfunding opportunity, because we tend to think that this is something that the community should and will support. So that's exciting as well. Everyone will be able to get involved. So we'll be right back with Walt Brown.
This is Richard Bartholomew of the Center for Deep Political Research. For more on the future of JFK assassination research, the deep political realities of the 2016 general election, and the research regarding the Mac Wallace fingerprint, allegedly in the Texas School Book Depository, listen to episode 70 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
Walt Brown, Ph.D., is a friend of the show. He's the author of The People vs. Lee Harvey Oswald, The War on Omission, Treachery in Dallas, and The Kennedy Execution. He was featured prominently in Randy Benson's fantastic documentary, The Searchers, and he's a columnist for the new magazine, Garrison. Now, we're glad to have him back. We had quite a few nice comments and emails about his last appearance, so it's good to welcome him back tonight. Walt Brown, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm good. We're having the beginning of spring here in northern New Jersey, and when the temperature hits 50 or close to 60, it's good stuff.
Well, your last episode with us was very popular. Now, it's done very well, and it really got the emails rolling, that's for sure. And we'll ask you more about those later in the show. But first, I'd like to focus a bit on your 1995 book, Treachery in Dallas. And
okay. I don't have a copy of it, but that's okay.
No, I've heard that. You know, I think, in fact, I think you said it on the last episode. Why is it that you don't have a copy of it?
I just haven't gotten off my lazy butt and ordered one on Amazon for $4 or something like that, just so I have a copy of everything that I did. Don't ask me what happened. You know, at one time I had 250 of them sitting downstairs. The publisher emptied out the warehouse and sent them to me, and they went here and they went there, and everybody wanted one, and next thing I know, I don't have one. That'll get fixed.
Well, you should have one. You should definitely have one. It's a really good book. And Walt, I think quite often we forget the local nature of this crime. And we've never really talked about Dallas specifically as a city on this show. So there are a few things that I'd like to ask about Dallas.
Well, Dallas was a good choice for what happened. It was for want of a better way of putting it, it was kind of the redneck capital of the United States back in the day. The stories circulate about, the police department all being John Birchers or Minutemen, and there is some truth to that, not universally, but some. And it was the only city in the United States that the Kennedy-Johnson ticket did not carry. Any city with, I'm going to say 200,000 people or more, they won, except Dallas. And you've had the Stevenson incident 4 weeks to the day before Kennedy was killed. It was just a hotbed. And the amazing thing, supposedly, the last thing John Kennedy ever said was a response to Mrs. Connelly. She turned to him as they were going up Houston Street and say, "You can't say Dallas doesn't love you." And he responded to her. But the people that were in the cars behind the president were not just looking at the street level, but they were looking up into the windows of the taller buildings, and you're going down that canyon on Main Street, and there was hatred coming out of those windows. And they commented about it well after the fact. They didn't want to say anything right away, but eventually it came out. It's just, people were looking at the windows like, if you don't make it to the trademark, that's okay too. And the speech that was scheduled for the trademark was basically in-your-face Dallas. The kind of hatred politics that you guys espouse is not American. Of course, that speech was never given, sadly.
So what they say about Dallas was always true in a sense that he was flying into and then riding into a very hostile environment.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And a good number of people in high places told Kennedy, listen, you're going to Texas, but don't go to Dallas.
Walt, I'm trying to understand the motivation for the trip in regards to the relative popularity of Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, we learned in schools, and yes, take that with a pound of salt,
yep,
that the trip was in part to boost JFK's popularity in the South, and it was always assumed that the apex of LBJ's Southern popularity in 1963 was obviously going to be in his home state of Texas. But just how popular was LBJ in Texas at this time?
Well, he wasn't. He had some problems in Dallas. I believe it was the Adolphus Hotel where a number of Kennedy conferences have been held, where somebody spit at him, and I think it was one, might have been even a Democrat. Some congressman called him out during the 1960 campaign there in Dallas. And there's a famous picture of LBJ, gesturing angrily at this character. As far as his popularity, it's hard to say. He certainly after he got all the pork that he sent to Texas as vice president, he was popular in Texas. Before that, it's really difficult to say. He only got to the Senate in 1948 because he stole the election, the famous Box 13 scandal. And then after that, at that point in time, it was a Democratic state, so whoever they put up is going to win. The Republican candidate was a lamb led to the slaughter. Then, civil rights changed all of that. But it's really hard to say how popular he was. It's fair to say he wasn't as popular as he thought he was.
Well, I don't think that we should confuse fear with popularity necessarily. I sure believe that there were a lot of local politicians and businessmen who didn't want to find themselves sort of tied to the political train tracks, if you will, while the LBJ thundered by. So I don't think that Johnson inculcating a culture of political or maybe even literal fear throughout Texas should be necessarily confused as being popular.
No. And there was a large element of coattails. He'd go around and give speeches for Homer, Goodbody, or whoever was running, and then they owed him. He built up IOUs just as Nixon did. When Nixon was pronounced dead politically after '62, losing the California governor's race, he went all over the United States for 6 years, eating more rubber chicken than I can even imagine, but piling up IOUs, and that they all got cashed in 1968.
Well, you're right. It's a favor-by-favor game, even if that's often unhealthy for the system that we're supposed to have some modicum of faith in. But I'd like to stay in Dallas and in Texas with the governor, John Connelly. Now, there's been some mild disagreement about the meaning of what he exclaimed in the car as it moved down Elm Street. So what did he say, and what did it mean?
Well, what people believe he said is, they're going to kill us all. Does that mean he knew it was a they? I doubt it. I mean, that's a generic statement. Because if you think about it, what's the alternative? He's just been shot through. He's not going to say he or perhaps she is going to kill us all. And there's no sense of gender specificity there. You can't say he's going to do it or she's going to do it. It's just they. I never read much into that. I read a lot of things into, the Connelly involvement, because he's looking up at the sky in Zapruder frame 312, and he goes spinning out of Nellie's arms in the next 3/4 of a second. And he was already going into shock, so it's not movement that he created. He got hit by another bullet. When he woke up in the hospital, he saw his arm in glued up, hanging up there in a sling. He didn't know he'd been shot through his arm, his wrist. What's that about? Oh, well, your wrist was broken by a bullet. He didn't know it. And the other thing, when he testified, he believed that he and Kennedy were not hit by the same bullet. So, and of course that beat up on the magic bullet. But he said, the last shot, he said, I'll never forget. And he smacked the table for the House Select Committee to make the sound. He said, I heard the shot, and then I heard smack, and it was like a watermelon falling on the ground, or something to that effect. Cantaloupe in season. What that doesn't take into account is he would have heard the watermelon before he heard the shot because of the distance and the speed that sound travels. He's 3 feet away from the sound of the watermelon, if you will, and he's 265 feet away from the sound of the shot. And when you start finding those things in testimony, you know you've been doing enough. He put it together, but at the same time, he wanted the kind of control that was amazing, because to Kennedy, it was a kickoff of a campaign. He wanted to have fundraisers at every stop, and Connelly says, no, we're not going to do that. You're not going to come down here and shake hands and kiss babies and pick everybody's pocket. You can have one fundraiser, and that's it. And I don't know.
John Connelly is also interesting to me because when Nixon defeats Humphrey and Wallace in 1968...
he switches hats.
Yes, and then Connelly is talked about for various positions in the Nixon administration, and finally in 1971, Nixon appoints Connelly to the position of Treasury Secretary. But, as the story goes, Connelly tells Nixon that he'll only take the position if his friend from Texas, George H.W. Bush, also has a position in the administration. So George H.W. Bush had just lost to Lloyd Benson in Texas. So what happens is Nixon appoints Bush to the position of ambassador to the UN. Connelly takes over at Treasury, and Bush's career is on the rise. But do you think that desire to keep Connelly in-house was, for Nixon and company, a decision with seeds from 11/22/63, or was it something else?
Not necessarily. It may well be. It might better be described as a situation where he was the officer of government in the state of Texas when it happened, and nothing ever came out of the state of Texas as far as what happened. The Dallas police to this day have no files. It's all in Washington, and it might well have been that Uncle Richard, Mr. Nixon, who died 3 miles from where I live, he might well have thought, this is a good guy to have around because he knows how the game is played. And for the same logic, when Spiro Agnew suddenly resigned on October 10th of 73, who does he appoint but a nobody, but somebody who could cover up a mess? Jerry Ford. Because believe me, there was more talent hanging around the United States in 1973 than Jerry Ford.
Yes.
Some of them were on corners with cups.
Right.
But it was unimaginable. And they treated Jerry Ford like the Aga Khan at the House Select Committee hearings. I mean, the people, the public that attended the public meetings were told, you may not stand up while this witness is introduced and walks in, and you must remain seated. And there was only 2 people that fell into that category. Jerry Ford, the Honorable Jerry Ford, because he was an ex-president by that time, and Marina Oswald.
That's interesting.
Everybody had to remain seated. Ford used classified stuff in the portrait of the assassin that he did of Oswald. And then when he was asked about that in his confirmation hearings for vice president, he said, no, I didn't do that. It's a lie. Then he came clean many years later saying, well, I did move the wound. For clarity,
Yeah,
for clarity.
I can't even understand what that means.
Well, I guess it's clarity in the sense that if it went out the front, it had to go in the back above that. But, and just to bring it full circle, when Ford died, I think in 2007, he was eulogized by H.W., and the central focus of the eulogy was that if you want to understand the honesty and integrity of Gerald Ford, all you need to know is that he put his name on the Warren report. Now, I stuck my head out the window when I heard that, and I could hear people groaning. But it's a game, and it's a game where the American people are always the losers, sadly, and it's going on to this day. It is going on to this day.
Yes, it sure is. But to move back to November 22nd, 1963, John Connelly, as you said, was the governor of Texas, and this was, in that year, a local homicide case. Yep. Apparently killing the president was not yet a federal crime, unbelievably. Yep. So the president of the United States is shot and killed in Connelly's home state. But you write a lot about the Dallas PD before and after the assassination. So sure. I'd like to ask you if you would really guide us through the complete breakdown of the local police. Because if I read you correctly, you put a lot of the onus on the local Dallas PD.
Yeah, I did. In a couple of cases, maybe a little too much. But first of all, there was such a limited Dallas police protection as far as the motorcade went, that it was just all wrong. After what happened with Stevenson, and knowing how the people of Dallas might have felt about Kennedy and Johnson, the protection was extremely thin. And there's a subtext to it. If that was if Friday, November 22nd was your day off, it was your day off. If you were working the late shift that day, you worked the late shift. You didn't come in a couple hours early. A great number of people that police officers, Dallas police officers that testified or they gave testimony in one venue or another, always made a point of saying, yeah, I was home, we had the television on, I heard the president had been shot, so I said, well, I guess, there might be some business to take care of, so I, cleaned up and went to work. Some of them were just away. And it needs to be noted, everybody says Earl Cabell, the mayor, who was a few cars back and, got threats. The mayor of Dallas was a figurehead. He cut the ribbon at shoe store openings. The real person that did the work was the city manager, and his name was Elgin Kroll, and he was nowhere to be found. The PD, they made assignments for the motorcade, and if Officer Bill Jones had to cut off traffic at a certain corner on the 12-mile route, he did what he had to do. Then he jumped back on the motorcycle, rode back roads for about 3 miles, and he had another assignment down the road. So it wasn't like there was a police presence. There were a lot of reservists on Main Street, unarmed, and they were told, if you see anything unusual, go find a uniformed officer who's armed. Well, if somebody goes running out of the crowd with a dagger, a reserve officer is not going to go looking around for an armed officer. One kid, I'm going to guess he was about 15 or 16, did run out of the crowd, and one of the Secret Service guys in the follow-up car tackled the guy and just threw him back into the group. Interestingly enough, the Warren Commission published the assignments of those motorcycle guys who were traffic officers. You cannot find the assignments for traffic officers for the motorcade to take Kennedy back from the luncheon to Love Field. And I've looked everywhere, and it was as if they were thinking, well, we don't need one, or we won't need one. Detectives were out doing what they do. Jim Lavelle, made famous by jumping out of the way when Oswald was shot. and claimed he was trying to pull Oswald out of the way. He arrested somebody for burglary and was taking him into police headquarters shortly after the motorcade went by. There really was no police presence. And what there was, and they've had situations before. When push came to shove, everybody was watching the motorcade and they weren't watching the people. If you got cops on the corners, and there was a book a couple of years ago about LBJ being the mastermind of the whole thing, and one of the statements in the book was that there was not a Dallas police officer after the corner of Main and Houston. So when the car turned right to go north 348 feet, there were no more cops, and there were a dozen cops that gave written reports or affidavits or whatever. But when when the car turned the corner, they were all looking at the car and not the people they were supposed to keep out of the way. And that's wrong. And then once you have the event, the first of two that day, there's a rush to Dealey Plaza, but they didn't find the bullets until 12 minutes after 1. And there were people pointing at the window for having seen something. And it took 42 minutes for anybody to get to that window? That's ridiculous. Marion Baker, who saw the pigeons fly off the book depository and figured, aha, that's where it was, because, these pigeons, they know where the shots come from. He dumped his motorcycle, ran in, bumped into Oswald on the second floor, says to Roy Truly, does this guy work here? Yeah, he does, okay. Then he went up to the 7th floor, went out on the roof, and because the pigeon droppings were not disturbed, he knew there couldn't have been an assassin out there. So what did he do? What did he do? He went right down out the front door and took off to go to the hospital, where there weren't going to be any suspects. Nobody seemed to be doing any investigating. Nobody recognized that it was a crime scene. As soon as the press bus went through, and there's one empty Dallas police car in the motorcade behind the press bus. Once that press bus went through with that other car, they opened the crime scene to traffic. And we've heard about the so-called Harper fragment, the bone fragment that was found. And a couple of officers said they saw pieces of bone in the street. They picked it up and put it back down. They didn't know what it was. Come on, that's a crime scene. And somebody should have had the good sense just to hold up a badge as high as he could, fire a couple shots in the air, and say, "Everybody, don't move. Just stay where you are. We're gonna take names." But they didn't do it. They dragged a few people over to the sheriff's office. And that's always been a debatable point. Why were the sheriff's deputies just sitting out in front of their office watching the parade? And the answer is that the Dallas Police Department are responsible for the city of Dallas. Sheriff Decker's boys are responsible for Dallas County, but not Dallas, the city. So they had technically no jurisdiction. Yet it's Eugene Boone who finds the gun, Roger Craig, the stories about him. What got done with any kind of professionalism was done, for the most part, by the deputies. They had a description at 12:45. Supposedly there was a roll call in the depository building, but somebody's recent research says there wasn't, because there was more than just Oswald missing. One guy had taken an extended lunch to get his teeth fixed for free at Baylor Dental College. Another guy had gone up Main Street. And he had an arrest record for narcotics, and they went looking after him real quick. And then once you have the Tippit event, there's a dichotomy. You have two murders. Ordinarily, it would only have been Tippit, because he's a brother officer. No matter who else got killed. The president, a station wagon full of nuns, it doesn't matter. Fellow officer. He was not a popular cop in Dallas. And once he got killed, well, whoever killed him obviously did it because they were trying to escape from having assassinated the president. What assassin makes his escape on foot? The doubling down on that, when Oswald gets in a taxi, the first thing he does is he offered that taxi to an older woman. To Oswald, any woman is older. But that was almost an act of contrition, and to me it says he realized he was into something that was way over his head. And he's just reaching out to humanity in a small way. But then he gets in a cab, sits in the front seat. And when he gets close to where he's going, he has the driver go six blocks or 600 feet, I don't know, but a good distance past where he lived. Why? The only possible explanation was that he was expecting some kind of ambush. Somebody would have been waiting for him right there at that moment. And when he didn't see any activity, then he went back in, got the gun, got the pistol. And why he went to work the day before without the pistol, if he was going to go home, if he was going to go back to Ruth's to get the rifle for Friday, he would have had that. If you can sneak a rifle into the book depository, you can damn sure sneak a pistol in. So none of it makes any sense. And then he's seen outside at 4 minutes or so after 1, and Tippit's killed 10 minutes later.
Now, you said that Officer J.D. Tippit was not a popular cop in Dallas. Why was that?
He rousted too many people for no reason. I spoke to people that lived out in the area where he regularly patrolled. 30 years ago, I was dealing with those folks, and he was. I won't quote what they said about him, but he wasn't popular. He rousted too many people, and he did it on November 22nd. He was sitting at a gas station at the last stop where Oswald's bus would have stopped. The bus that Oswald got on, which was going into traffic that was craziness, and was subsequently searched by the Dallas police after Oswald got off it by a few minutes. Tippit was waiting at the stop. Oswald would have gotten off at the end of the line of the Marsalis bus. The bus shows up, nobody gets off. Tippit goes like a bat out of hell up Jefferson Boulevard. He pulled somebody over. Didn't ask the guy for license, registration, nothing. Just looks at the guy, walks around the car a couple times, looks in the car, leaves him alone. Beat it, buddy. Why'd he pull him over? Why didn't he get some ID? Then he goes into the top 10 record store, uses the telephone, and makes a call. Now, whether or not it was answered, we'll never know. I always thought that it was a payphone in that store, and it's not. It's a regular sit on the top of the counter phone. If it was a payphone and the dime dropped, it meant somebody picked up and said, go to such and such and hang up. Click. I don't know what happened. He let it ring a few times, put the phone down, and then drove to the spot where he was murdered. He didn't wind his way around. At one point, and I know this from one of the Dallas cops that I knew very well for a number of years, since deceased. He said, "Yeah, when we were going off duty, 10 of us are going off duty. 9 of us went out the front door of the substation, took a left and went to the bar, for booze and women. And J.D. turned right and went home to work on he was doing a restoration on an automobile, I think a 49 Ford automobile. And he wasn't one of the boys. He also used to moonlight, of all places, at the Texas Theater. So when Julia Postal, the ticket seller, hears about what's going on and finds out that an officer was killed and it was J.D. Tippit, hey, he used to, work here on weekends, crowd control. Because the Texas Theater, little known fact, was a very, very famous structure in its day. When it opened in 1931, it was the movie theater in the United States. It was the most serious cinematic venue you could find anywhere in the United States. Now, of course, it's every time they try and open it again, it catches fire and the water damage closes it. And, of course, Tippit also moonlighted at Austin's Barbecue and was supposedly having an affair with somebody there. And the police officer that I knew so well, his name is Jay Harrison. His name might be familiar to people in the research community because he had an incredible archive that I inherited. But the one thing, and Jay took me on a tour of famous Kennedy-related graves in the greater Dallas area. J.D. Tippit was one of them. Rose Sharami, who got thrown out of the car the night before, was another one. Then Liggett, Roscoe White, you name it. I saw their graves. But I told Jay, Tippit was having a problem with this affair that he was involved in. And Jay said, no, I knew him too well. When he went off duty, we went this way and he went home. So one day when I was down in Texas visiting, Jay said, let's go, I want you to meet somebody. And he took me to meet Gerald Hill, who was a sergeant on November 22nd, and he was all over everywhere. He was sitting in the front seat of the car that brought Oswald into custody. Then we got to talking, and he was very forthcoming. And he admitted to having his suspicions about Johnson. And I said pointedly to get to the bottom of it, I said, what about J.D.? Was he as much of a homebody as we've been led to believe? And then Jay cut in and said, Walt thinks, he was carrying on with some woman, yakety-yak. And Jerry just looked at him and said, Jay, if he'd have lived another 6 months, he would have been divorced. And that was an extreme chastisement for Jay. But the Tippit was dead on the ground. Why did they have to run his body away? That's a crime scene, too. And it was violated. And it wasn't well handled. Then they chased the kid into the library. He didn't do it. Then they knew something suspicious was supposedly going on at the Texas Theater. And 30 police cars showed up because somebody snuck in without buying a ticket on the day the president was killed. And then that's the moment when the real PD problem arises. When they put handcuffs on Oswald, case closed. We got the guy on both counts. We got the guy that did both. Enough. Stop looking. Nothing, no leads to run down. Whatever Oswald said in custody, they couldn't afford a tape recorder, and the stenographer was out of pencils. It was absurd. He did say he was a patsy going through the halls, and nobody had the wisdom to say, whom are you a patsy for? And it's in Seth Cantor's notebook, so there's a real good suggestion that he actually did say it. Then on Saturday night, he made an attempt to call Naval Intelligence in North Carolina. And there were suits. I don't know if it was FBI or who it was, but there were guys at the Dallas Police Headquarters that just looked at the operator and shook their head, no. So, she put the call through to the Weather Bureau or something like that and told Oswald on the, the wall phone where he's allowed to talk, I'm sorry, nobody's picking up, sir. Next day, he's dead.
I want to ask you about the behavior of the ticket taker at the Texas Theater in Dallas that day, because it's always been a little bit puzzling to me. Now, you might be able to explain this a lot better than most people have, but knowing what had just happened in her own city, one, I'm surprised they didn't stop the film and close down the theater instantly, but also two, why would she call police for someone who'd snuck in without paying? Because I'm assuming, like it is with any other theater, that she has high school kids doing this all the time. And does every instance of a high school kid sneaking in also warrant calling the police? And when, again, on a day like that, in a moment like that, when does that sort of meaningless call bring that many police to that location? I mean, why wouldn't she have just sort of contacted the manager or the supervisor to just throw out the non-paying customer? It seems odd to me.
Well, yeah, I think in effect she was probably the manager, because there were 3 employees. The Butch Burroughs at the concession counter, and I don't know if he's still alive. If he is, he's the poster boy for an 85 IQ. Julia Postal was taking care of tickets, and there was a projectionist. And 2 people from the theater were questioned by the Warren Commission, a man named Gibson and a man named Appel, A-P-P-E-L, George Appel. And the Warren Commission concluded that because it was afternoon, it was big stuff doing, they were probably the only people in the theater. And I'm thinking, how do you pay 3 employees and rent on 2 customers? As it was, Julia Postal sold 24 tickets. But it's just, nobody looked. Nobody took names. Nobody said, don't move. They should have taken a statement from everyone in that theater. And they didn't. Because thinking is, and I can't prove yes or no, Oswald went to the theater to meet a contact. And supposedly he went and sat down over by a group of people on one side. And nobody turned around and said, hi, howdy do, or gave the secret handshake. So he went someplace else. And then finally he was sitting alone in the back. But all of those people should have been spoken to. Their perceptions. They knew nothing about the killing. They didn't even know it happened. Whether or not they knew about Kennedy remains an unknown. It should have been discovered. Did you know the president had been killed or shot? Because his death hadn't been announced yet when the movie started. But their perceptions. You know, how many people go to the movies that the president's killed? You know, and Anne has a gun. And although, from what I've seen in Dallas, just being there, if a kid goes to school without his gun, he's got to have a note from home. Because I was in Dealey Plaza one time, and a fellow came over and started talking to me, and I said, you know, by the way, my name is Walt, and I wrote my first Kennedy book was People versus Lee Harvey Oswald. And he said, oh, yeah, oh, wow. So he wanted to mail me the book, and I'd sign it for him. So I said, yeah, sure. So he opens his briefcase to get a pen and a paper, and there's a gun in there and bullets. So I didn't say anything. And by the way, I said, what is it that you do? He said, I repair Xerox machines. I'm thinking, if one of them isn't going to be fixable, do you shoot it? And it was amazing. It was just absolutely amazing. And I discovered, because I had to know, what is the requirement to carry a gun in Texas? And if you fulfill any of 3 categories, you can carry a gun at will. 1, if you have more than $250 on your person. Okay, that means if you're going to buy gas, you can have a gun. 2, if you're going to be staying somewhere other than your official residence overnight. I'm sure there's an age requirement for, you know, purchasing the gun. You know, you have to be this tall to go on the ride. And of course now, and it's certainly not confined to Texas, there are guns in school everywhere. I taught 7th and 8th grade, and we had a gun in the building in 1992. And the kid got a slap on the wrist.
Well, yes, and now I want to turn to the listener emails, if we can.
Sure.
And the most email we received after our last episode concerned the computer and the files of Jay Harrison, which we talked about a lot on the last episode. So if anyone wants to hear more of that, please go listen to that first. Now, you said that you loaned part of Jay's massive collection to author Joan Mellon. But you also said that she's never returned what was loaned. Now, you would be surprised at how many people emailed and wanted me to ask you if you'd ever ask Joan for them back. And if not, why haven't you? That's the prevailing theme of the emails that we received about that last episode. And someone even emailed and asked you if you thought Joan even still had them.
Well, I certainly did. Let me clarify. I flew down to Texas on May the 19th of 2005. It was a Thursday. And Jay died the following Wednesday. And between Friday and Saturday, not Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I loaded a rental car with dozens of, I made trip after trip after trip to the post office, mailing some of Jay's materials home here. Then for safety's sake, I got a storage locker that was big enough that I could go up there, put a light bulb in it and work from the stuff. And in 2000, there was some really nasty stuff on the internet about Jay's materials. Jack White suggested that, if the price was right, I would sell the stuff, which was never a consideration in any manner. There were people demanding that I make them available, and I said, you don't know what you're asking for. There's like 4 million sheets of paper. It fills a couple of dozen 8-foot bookcases, notebooks. Jay was living on Social Security and computers that he sold, that he got for free. He was spending every last dime on paper, ink for his printer, and binders, just putting all this stuff together. And I said, anybody that wants to come here and use this stuff, come on. But, as it happened, one of the persons who signed this petition, I was supposed to open up like the National Archives. And by the way, I was using the stuff for the chronology that I was doing that I spent 7.5 years doing, and it turned out to be 32,000 pages long. So it wasn't like I was hiding it. I was using it. One of the people who was the loudest in demanding that archive be open wasn't aware that Jay had a file on a husband and wife, and one of those people was one of the signatories of this nasty petition. And apparently, because every email he got, he printed and saved. Apparently, this couple, and I'm not naming them, out of fairness, they were having serious problems with the IRS. And in their emails to Jay, they used language that would make George Carlin blush. And I wrote to one of them, I said, you want that archive released? Your file is going to be released. And do you want everybody to know that you think the IRS is... No.
Well, I absolutely respect your right not to name them. I wouldn't name them either if it's not necessary. But because I am curious and because I have a certain idea, I want to ask you this. Are they currently still living in Texas?
I believe so. Insofar as I know, yes. Because one of them is the kind of employee where he would have to be licensed, and I know he was licensed in Texas. But Joan Mellon came up with Malcolm Blunt, a tremendous British researcher, tremendous. We sat and we talked for about 6 hours, Labor Day weekend in 2008, maybe 9, but I think it was 2008. And then she said to me, listen, can I borrow that stuff and use it? And I said, sure. And she drove up. She came back up here. She lives down near Princeton, New Jersey, so it's about 75 miles maybe. She drove up in an SUV, and we filled that vehicle. And I gave her Jay's computer, and I gave her the additional hard drives that went with it. And I said, use this stuff to your heart's delight. And footnote Jay, not me, Jay. And at the end of the day, about 2.5 years went by, and I'm still getting these emails about when are you going to open the back door and let the stuff out. And I certainly wasn't going to tell people, well, Joan Mellon has it. What are you worried about? But I did get a hold of Joan, and I said, Joan, listen, I need to get that stuff back at some point. And she said, all right. Apparently she was having a health issue, so she got her students to box everything up, and it was shipped to me. Now, the computer never came back. The hard drives never came back. I'm not convinced that everything went out of here came back. But it's not a problem, because at the end of the day, 90% of the stuff was worthless. Interesting, but worthless as far as what I was trying to find out. I mean, he had genealogies. The spreadsheet would fill a large-size room when he taped it all together. And he was in real estate, Jay Harrison. After being a police officer, he went into real estate, and he'd do the genealogy on a piece of real estate he was doing. And he would say, that house that you're looking at was owned by the grandson of a Confederate general. Boom, sold. And he could prove it. And Jay was the key to those materials. And without Jay, I'd say, wait a minute, who's this guy? Oh, he connects to so-and-so who's over here. I didn't even know who so-and-so was. I mean, it was incredible work that he had done, but a great deal of it had absolutely no value.
I think what people are really honing in on here, Walt, are the drives and the computer, because it seems like it was a pretty easy call to make when you have someone else's property. I mean, there isn't a reason to hold on to the computer and the drives unless there's a very good reason to hold on to the computer and the drives, because otherwise you can just call them and say, hey, Walt, I want to get this back to you, but mailing a computer and drives, that's going to be an exorbitant cost. How can I best get this back to you? Do you want to come and get it? Or
I'd drive a Corvette.
Right. And I do understand that. But what I'm saying is that if it were a priority, there would have at least been a discussion.
Well, we did talk, and she said, look, I will get it taken care of. I promise you that. And she was as good, she was, I'm going to say maybe it was 2 or 3 months later, and I wasn't calling her and haranguing her. When it got here, it got here. I know it didn't all come back. One time, somebody wanted to go through my whole collection of videos. They were recovering from surgery, and they were going to be on their back for 4 months. I said, look, I'll send them to you. So I sent this box full of videos. I sent it media rate, and it cost $13 to send it. Okay. 6 months passed. I said, I'd like those videos back. Oh, sure, no problem. They were shipped back first class, and it cost $6. Now, that would allow a curious individual to think that what I sent didn't all come back. And it's in the nature of the beast. Now, for anybody that is wondering about Jay's stuff today, it's gone. It's either, if it had any value, it's in my chronology. If it had no value whatsoever, if it was some guy that died in 1915, it's gone. I mean, it took some doing to just go through. And if it's a family tree going back 6 generations of the Connellys, for instance, because Mrs. Johnson, Lady Bird, went running to the emergency room once the Secret Service had things secured to be with Nellie Connelly, not Mrs. Kennedy, because Connelly's daughter had just died within a recent time frame. And that was extremely fishy, but it was Connelly's daughter, so. And the person who should have been charged with murder got away with it. But Jay's stuff was available to anybody that wanted to come and get it. And I finally told one person, I said, look, you want to rent the Xerox machine and park it in my living room? Fine. If you can make 1,500 copies a day, it'll take you 6 years. Up to you.
I can't even imagine acquiring that amount of material and then being tasked with somehow keeping it important and finding the value in it. I mean, there were some tough decisions, to be sure.
Yep.
But what I find fascinating about Jay Harrison is that he was so dedicated to this case. He was there in Dallas helping with the investigation from day one, and then he never left the case, or rather, the case never left him.
Yep.
And that's what I'd like to ask you about next, actually. You know, there's so many people that I know that have gotten to a point of burnout with this case, and they have to take time away for their own sanity and their own well-being. But to this day, you have such zeal for the investigation into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. How do you maintain that?
Well, I'd have to kind of plead guilty to not fully maintaining the zeal. Because when I did the chronology, it was 7.5 years, 32,000 pages, and when I got done, I realized I'd only taken 40 days off in those 7.5 years. Because I had to keep everything fresh in my head, because any fact I came upon could either be contradicted by an earlier fact or corroborated by an earlier fact. So I had the whole thing in my mental desktop, and I couldn't walk away from it. But I had to. I kept up. What really took a chunk of zeal out of me is I started reading the stuff that I hadn't read during the chronology, and most of it was self-published rubbish. I read a book, a couple of months ago, and it claimed to be exactly, minute for minute, where Lee Oswald was from noon until 2 p.m. when he was arrested. Well, he was arrested at 1:51, but that's neither here nor there. Of those 120 minutes, 90 minutes are not mentioned. And at the end of the book, it's a one-chapter book, $5.95 on Amazon. At the end of the book, the guy says, you know what? I think Oswald walked out the front door of the rooming house, walked up Jefferson Boulevard, and went to the movies. Never went near the Tippit scene, never did any of that other crazy stuff, throwing the jacket under the car, whatever. Never happened. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you grabbed me on my computer screen and said, this is what happened for 2 hours of Lee Oswald's life and the last hour of John Kennedy's life. And now you're telling me it's all rubbish? But that was the story. And there's just a lot of that. That book that I mentioned that said, there were no cops, guarding Kennedy at a certain point, and that Johnson had control of the Secret Service, which is absolute rubbish because they didn't like him very much. It also said, for instance, that the decision to take the top off the Lincoln convertible that Kennedy was in, that decision was made by Bill Moyers. And Bill Moyers was a Johnson aide who that morning was in Austin, Texas, and had nothing whatsoever to do with the motorcade. Nothing. But there it is. And when something like that comes out, not now, but back in the day, when something like that would come out, my phone would ring. Mr. Brown, yes, you wrote such and such, and Treachery in Dallas, and War on Omission. Yeah. What do you think about the book that says such and such? I think it's rubbish. I'm not going to support it. I'm not going to stand behind it and say, well, it was a conspiracy. Of course it was a conspiracy. But that doesn't mean that all of those ridiculous factoids have any relation to reality. Because once you step outside the reality zone, you can come up with just about anything. And people have come up with just about everything. There were 21 shots fired at the motorcade. No, there weren't more than 13. Oy.
Well, that's true. It's a case that's had legs over the decades, and some of those legs ran right into the zoo, in my opinion, and some by sheer wackiness, and others actually quite by design. But when you think about Jay and the files and the research, I would guess that it has to bring thoughts of your own mortality, because it does mine. I always think, what happens with everything that I have and with everything that I've done if I pass or when I pass? Do you think about what would happen to your own research?
Well, I've already... And you're not the only one that wants me dead.
No. That's totally not what I'm saying.
I've already seen to that in my my will. That's all taken care of. But this is going to sound strange. Most of what I know, most of my Kennedy stuff is in my head. I had one collection of files, and I already have transferred them to somebody for safekeeping. In the last year, I've written 4 books. One was about Russia and Germany in World War II, which was the most god-awful battle scenario you can imagine. And then 3 whodunit novels, and they were a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun doing that because I'm the detective that solves the stuff, and I get a big kick out of it. It's fun to do. And it passes the time, when it's dark and wintry. And I just finished one Sunday, so now I'm halfway through a Stephen King-like book.
Well, speaking of your most recent writing, I want to personally and publicly thank you so much for joining the team of Garrison, the new journal, as a contributor. Now, you wrote a fine piece, appropriately called The War and Omission. Yeah. So when that's out in a few weeks, I hope everyone's able to read that. But I would just want to say thank you again for being on the team, Walt. It is absolutely a pleasure to have you aboard.
We're just getting started on that one. We're just getting, and I did that one off the top. Because the numbers that are in there, the numbers that refer to witnesses, that only exists in Treachery in Dallas, and I don't have a copy of it. But unbeknownst to most people, War and Omission was supposed to be the third part of Treachery in Dallas, and the publisher just said, no, we're not going to put that many pages out. Be happy with what you got. And they changed the title. Oh, it was a horror show. They changed. Originally, they had a cover on it that made it out to be a lone assassin. I just said, you can't do that. They said, no. Well, I said, no. They had, it was a picture from Life magazine, and they had a dotted line going from the 6th floor window to this white convertible going down Elm Street. And they said, well, that's the president's car. I said, Kennedy was in a car that was midnight blue. Most people think it's black. It was midnight blue. And I said, and that's not it. And the shots didn't all come from that window. Oh, well, why don't you send us some stuff? So I did. And that's where the cover came from. But when you deal with publishers, I've since opened my own publishing company. So I don't ever have to deal with a publisher again. It won't make the New York Times, but nobody's going to pick my pocket either.
Well, I've said this on the show before, but I really believe we do a great disservice by continually seeking approval from the mainstream media establishment. And by thanking and praising the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal for doing a story that we like, say, once a year, we allow them the power that they have. We're sort of like the runt kid brother seeking some sort of meaningless acceptance from the bullying, horrendous older brother and sort of allowing him power that he doesn't necessarily deserve. But my question is, when can we begin to praise the work that we like from our own community and, in essence, create our own media and ignore the mainstream?
Well, the problem is that what used to be called the research community, I don't know how much research is going on, and I know it's not a community. There's a lot of knives constantly being sharpened. And a year ago this month, last March, there was a conference somewhere near Dulles Airport, I believe in Virginia, Maryland, wherever, a JFK conference. And one of the marquee names at that conference was Roger Stone, because he said LBJ did it. Well, we know what Roger Stone has become a caricature of himself. And if that's the best a Kennedy conference can put forward, they're wasting their time. Because people who are still serious about this, and sadly, actuarial studies will tell the tale. The number of people that have an interest in this declines every day. And if the best you can do is Roger Stone, you're hurt. Let me just ask you, did I get to the email concerns about Jay's materials?
Well, yes, I think the main theme of the emails, from what I read, was whether or not you would ask for it back, and if you hadn't, why not?
No, I absolutely asked for it back. What I didn't get back, I can't speak to, because I don't know what I didn't get back, except the computer. And then secondarily, I've sent stuff to this one over here and that one over there, and just said, look, if you can do anything with it, keep it. I'm done. I'm done with it. I did the chronology, and then I did essentially an epilogue to it. Here's what comes out of it. Here's what I see. And it's called the Kennedy Execution. And that will absolutely be the last Kennedy book I ever write. I've done it. You can only come at it so many different ways. And I've tried to come at it every different way in terms of looking at the first book. Would Oswald have been found guilty or innocent at a trial? Treachery in Dallas. What was the inner workings of the thing? War on a mission. What went wrong in D.C.? The chronology, that's the whole story. And then, it spits out the Kennedy Execution. It's on Amazon, or it's me. It's my company. So, and it's shocked the number of people that there's not quite the volume of sarcasm in there that I'm known for. But that one is, for the most part, deadly serious, because it has to be. There's no room. You can deal in sarcasm when you talk about some of the idiotic questions that the Warren Commission asked, or some of the obvious things that they didn't follow up on, the DPD. My dog is running wild downstairs. But the one thing, when it comes down to why was President Kennedy killed and who killed him, you can't let a glimmer of humor confuse the issue.
So, Walt Brown, we have The People versus Lee Harvey Oswald, Treachery in Dallas, The War on Omission, The Kennedy Execution, The Chronology, The Global Index. Tell listeners how they can buy all of these if so interested.
Well, the place to start would be send me an email, and my email address is K as in Kennedy, I-A-S as in Sam, K-I-A-S JFK at AOL.com. And if you're interested in Kennedy Execution, the chronology, or War on Omission, I still have a lot of chronologies. I have some War on Omission, I have some Kennedy Execution, or the new mysteries. If you like my sarcasm, there's plenty of it there. Just send me an email, tell me what you're interested in, and I'll give you the costs, and I usually pay the freight. And you send, and I send. It's real simple. And I promise nobody's going to be disappointed, because I stand behind what I've done, and that goes back to when we started the magazine in 1995. Looking at the old issues, they look like baby pictures, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. And as I told you before we went on the air, it's getting a little tedious for me. I'd like more time. I'd like a lot more time, but I'm not going to get it. More time to myself. I've given John F. Kennedy everything I can, and sometimes it's difficult to sit anywhere in the United States today and imagine that we had John F. Kennedy as president. Because if you put the president now on the TV and had a split screen and had John F. Kennedy over here, the pain would be too great. And it's no doubt in my mind we lost something massive, a mindset that'll never come back in 1963. It had a chance in 68, and it was another shot in the back of the head. But it's never been the same. And my generation was Vietnam, and that only came about because of the motorcade in Elm Street. And there were losses. Every ball field in my little town here has a plaque, a $5,000 plaque, commemorating somebody from this town that was killed in Vietnam. And I get down there, I'm ready to go for the game, and the 30-year-olds come down and they look, who was this guy born in 1947? Hey, he and I went to school together. We used to play ball together. You know the guy? Of course I know him. And that just opened a can of worms. 4 airplanes changed this country forever. And I said to somebody on the phone last night, I would love to know how many millions, if not billions, of shoes have been taken off in airports because of one person. Weapons of mass destruction. Build a wall. It's the same thing. If the American people knew where they were getting the steel for this wall, they wouldn't want it. It's not coming from U.S. Steel. It's coming from a company owned by a Russian oligarch. But that's for them to find out. It wouldn't have happened. It would not have happened on John Kennedy's watch. And that's, we lost something incredible that day. And I dedicated myself to getting as close as I could to the truth. And I really think the chronology takes you through so much truth. Then when you get to Kennedy execution, it just falls into place. I was at a book signing about 5 years ago with Richard Belzer, comedian, detective, and he drew a good crowd. This was at the Friars Club in New York City, a place I couldn't afford to walk past, much less go in. And there were 2 young ladies, 35-ish, and I was sitting next to Richard, and I was telling him, sign this book for Leslie or whoever. And one of them said to me, why doesn't the government just come out and tell us what happened? And I said, look, it was 50 years. Yeah, it was 50 years ago. I said, just imagine, you and your husband have been married for 50 years. And on your 50th wedding anniversary, he says, dear, there's something I really got to tell you. I was having an affair when we were on our honeymoon. I'd kill the son of a bitch. I said, see, that's why they can't tell you. And Richard Belzer jumped all over that and said, well, wait a minute, stand up on the chair and tell the whole audience that story, which I felt silly doing, but I did. But that's what it's about. They can't come out now and say, well, we knew what happened, but we didn't. It would be devastating. And I'm sure there are secrets about the War of 1812. And we can talk about it, and we can energize the good people that listen to your show and read your magazine. But at the end of the day, they got to go to work. They got families to take care of. They got a little time for Mr. Kennedy, and God bless. I was lucky that I had a lot of time for Mr. Kennedy. And if I had to do over again, would I do it? You betcha. You betcha.
Well, Walt Brown, we are glad that you did. This has been Walt Brown, author and researcher. Walt Brown, Ph.D., actually. Author and researcher, and we're glad to have you back on again. Thank you so much.
Well, I look forward to our next get-together already. And I want to thank you, and certainly thank your audience for listening, because they're the big part. Take my best. You be well. Everybody out there, be well.
And our listeners absolutely are the biggest part of the show. Well, that's been Walt Brown. I'm S.T. Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show, and I'll be right back.
This is John Stern, the author of C.D. Jackson, Cold War Propagandist for Democracy and Globalism. For more on Ike's propagandist, Cold War manipulator, and where propaganda is today, listen to episode 74 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
This is Representative Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat from Hawaii, on Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough, Mia Brzezinski, And the first voice you'll hear asking a question, reporter Cassie Hunt.
Do you think Assad
if
is
we
our
are
enemy?
serious about the pursuit of peace.
Do you think Assad is our enemy?
Assad is not the enemy of the United States because Syria does not pose a direct threat to the United States.
What do you say to Democratic voters who watched you go over there, and what do you say to military members who have been deployed repeatedly in Syria, pushing back against Assad?
People who have been deployed to Syria have been there focused on their mission, which has been to defeat ISIS. Our troops have not gone to Syria to wage yet another costly, destructive regime change war. And many troops I hear from express frustration at the fact that our country continues to wage senseless, costly regime change wars, followed by nation-building missions, leading to situations like we see in Afghanistan. So many examples of our troops being deployed, their lives put on the line, without understanding what the clear mission or objective is and how that mission actually serves the security of the American people in the United States.
Which I think a lot of Americans would agree with you there. But again, going back to Assad is not an enemy. Is he an adversary of the United States?
We have to look to who poses a threat to the United States and the American people.
I understand that, but there are a lot of people who don't pose a direct military threat to the United States who consider themselves to be adversaries of the United States. Vladimir Putin poses or considers America to be an enemy. We consider Russia to be an adversary. I'm just asking, do you consider Assad to be an adversary of the United States?
When I look at whether it's Syria or Turkey or Russia or China or other countries in the world, I look at what are their interests and are their interests counter to our interests.
So what would you say he is to the United States? If you cannot say that he's an adversary or an enemy, what is Assad to the U.S.? What is the word?
You can describe it however you want to describe it.
I want to know how you describe it.
My point is that whether it is Syria or any of these other countries, we need to look at how their interests are counter to or aligned with ours.
Are Assad's interests aligned with ours?
What are Assad's interests?
Assad seems interested in the slaughter primarily of his own people, in part. I mean, how does that line up? Survival, yeah.
So forget what you've been conditioned to do in the game of politics. Forget that one label should be cheered and the opposing label should be jeered. Hashtag two sides, same coin. Remember, however, that many of the same lobbyists and billionaire capitalists support candidates from both parties, thus assuring a profitable win either way. Now remember also that politicians from both sides of this increasingly turgid political aisle have all overwhelmingly supported the permanent war state, which we talk about often on this show. So forget the labels, remember the ideals, and consider the current case of Democratic presidential candidate Representative Tulsi Gabbard. Now, Gabbard stirred up some intra-party commotion when she recently appeared on MSNBC's Morning Joe program with Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. You just heard that. Now, Mika, as you know, is the daughter of Zbigniew Brzezinski, once a leading globalist and Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. So that's always an interesting link when watching the show. Now, NBC News correspondent Cassie Hunt asked Gabbard if Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad was an enemy to the United States. Gabbard replied, Assad is not the enemy of the United States because Syria does not pose a direct threat to the United States. Great answer. Now, Hunt, appalled at Gabbard's refusal to label Assad as an enemy, made an unsolicited appeal to Gabbard on behalf of every Democratic voter in the United States. She asked, what do you say to Democratic voters who watched you go over there? And what do you say to military members who've been deployed repeatedly in Syria, pushing back against Assad? That's what she asked. And so it must have been baffling at this moment to Gabbard that an NBC journalist lacked the basic facts about events taking place in Syria. American troops are not there to, quote, push back against Assad, unquote. Journalist Max Blumenthal agreed with that, and he tweeted, this is such an embarrassing look at the state of corporate American regime media. Cassie Hunt doesn't know the most basic facts about Syria, and along with her co-hosts, doesn't care to learn. Now, Gabbard's response to Hunt's assumption that the Hawaiian congressman was disappointing all Democratic voters is the reason why Gabbard deserves a fair look. Now, Gabbard responded again. People who've been deployed to Syria have been there focused on the mission, which has been to defeat ISIS. Our troops have not gone to Syria to wage yet another costly, destructive regime change war, and many troops I hear from express frustration at the fact that our country continues to wage senseless, costly regime change wars, followed by nation-building missions, leading to situations like we see in Afghanistan. So many examples of our troops being deployed, their lives being put on the line, without understanding what the clear mission or objective is, and how that mission actually serves the security of the American people and the United States. Well, Scarborough, a former Republican U.S. representative from Florida, the Panhandle of Florida, jumped in towards the end of Gabbard's very lucid response to demand that she label Assad. If he's not an enemy, what is he? If he's not an adversary, but not an enemy, what is he? Is he an adversary? Is he an enemy? Is he like Putin? Well, the mainstream media establishment believes in labels. Understand that. They need labels to exist. And once the jerseys are donned, the American viewers can then be dog whistled to cheer and support or bellow in painful disgust at said labels. Now, Gabbard knows that she doesn't have to answer a question just because it's asked, and she knows that she doesn't have to respond on command as if it's some game show. When Gabbard refused to label Assad, Brzezinski then jumped in to ask the same question, but even more pointedly. What is Assad to the U.S., she asked. What is the word? She wanted one word. She wanted to boil it down to one word that perfectly describes a leader in the world. I mean, it's baffling. Well, Gabbard smartly said, you can describe it however you want it. Perfect. And Gabbard, as we should point out, by the way, is a member of the House Armed Services Committee. She knows foreign policy professionally and personally. She's also a major in the Hawaiian Army National Guard, and she spent a year in Iraq as a medical field unit specialist in a combat zone. She understands what she's talking about here, believe me. Now, she enlisted while she was a state representative in Hawaii, a position that she'd been elected to at the age of 21, the youngest state representative in Hawaii's history. She was also deployed then to Kuwait in 2008 and 2009. Suffice to say, she has spent time on the ground. Now, as one of the young Democrats in the House, Gabbard being born in the Reagan years, that is, she's also challenged the decisions of the party leadership. And as a vice chair for the Democratic National Committee in 2016, she even clashed with Chairman Debbie Wasserman Schultz's decision to limit the number of debates within the Democratic primaries. And this would, by default, aid the establishment Dems like Hillary Clinton and force the younger Democrats and lesser-known senators like Bernie Sanders to then raise more money, to campaign more, to make more campaign stops, more appearances, just to survive the campaign. And as an example, in 2008, the Democrats held 26 debates. 6 debates were held in 2016. So you go from 26 to 6 in 8 years. So what happened next? Well, Gabbard resigned her position as the vice chair of the DNC so that she could actively campaign for Sanders, noting that in her position with the DNC, she had, quote, checked her free speech at the door, unquote. Well, Gabbard is absolutely a domestic Democrat, and she supports the same policies as many of the other young New Democrats. But domestic squabbles are democracy. They should happen in a republic. The left, the right, the whoever should be sort of battling out on the field of ideology. That's what should happen in a republic based upon democracy. And in most cases, domestic policies do not cost Americans thousands of lives. Foreign policies do, and that's where she's an outlier and a breath of fresh air in the realm of foreign policy. She is someone speaking against this permanent war state that we talk about quite often, and Americans of all political ideologies should listen. From the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I wish you peace.